Hey, this is Andy, also known as the Palm Springs Linguist, and I thought I'd do a video that's a little bit different today. I'm going to tell the story of how I became the Palm Springs Linguist. What are my experiences with languages that led me up to this point as a YouTuber specializing in language and linguistics, and I do a little bit of Disney as well. So, first of all, I was raised in Southern California, and my four grandparents were each born in a different country. One in Belgium, one in Quebec on my mom's side of the family. They spoke French. Um, and then on my dad's side of the family, I had one that was born in Texas and one that was born in Mexico. And both of them spoke Spanish. My grandparents were pretty much out of the picture by the time that I was being raised for the most part. Um, but my parents, I always knew that my parents were exposed to other languages. My dad was exposed to Spanish and my mom was exposed to French. Now, they only spoke to me in English, but I did have a situation growing up where my mom, whenever she would visit with her sisters or with my grandmother, whenever she didn't want little Andy to understand, she would switch to French. So I never heard enough French to learn it from them, but just enough to perk up my ears and know that, okay, they're talking about something adult or something that they didn't want me to hear. So that always kind of made me intrigued with the French language, making me want to learn it someday. When I went to junior high school, I had to pick a language to study in junior high, and my mom really wanted me to study French. I have three older brothers and sisters, and they all chose Spanish, and she wanted one of her kids to learn French since that was her first language up until she was about 6 years old. So I took French, and I continued French until I got to high school, and then I started to feel that, I live in Southern California, and in Southern California, unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people that I can speak French with. But there were lots and lots of people that I could speak Spanish with. So in Southern California, Spanish is a very useful language. It's definitely the number two language after English. Very useful. So I switched to Spanish in high school and continued to learn Spanish all throughout high school. And my favorite story when I was in high school, I had a teacher that was teaching the verb molestar. And of course, molestar, for those of you that speak Spanish, means to bother. And I remember one of the kids that was sitting next to me, he raised his hand and said, no, 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 no. Molestar, that doesn't mean to bother. That means to molest. And the teacher stopped dead in her tracks, turned around, and said, if you're molesting somebody, you're bothering them. And I just laughed so hard because, obviously it's a much more serious offense than bothering somebody. But I will never, ever, ever forget the meaning of molestar. So out of high school, I got one of my first jobs. I worked at Burger King, and I worked in the kitchen at Burger King. And there were a lot of guys that worked in the kitchen, especially during the week, that whose first language was Spanish, and they spoke English to various levels of English proficiency. And there was one of the people in there, I'll never forget him, Martin. Martin didn't really speak any English at all. And so there were different jobs in Burger King in the kitchen, making the sandwiches, making the chicken sandwiches, making the burgers, making the fries. But the most mundane job they had was to put the patties, the ground beef patties, on the conveyor belt and letting them go across the conveyor belt and then taking them off on the other side of the conveyor belt because the conveyor belt would go through a charbroiler. So I worked there for like a year, and that's the only thing they ever let him do because he didn't speak any English. And that just really bothered me. That really bothered me because, this guy's a smart guy. This guy has a perfectly good intellect. He just doesn't speak English yet. And there were plenty of other jobs in the kitchen where you could really get by without speaking English, especially because so many of the words were cognates. You know, the words that you would use in a Burger King kitchen would be things like mayonnaise, mayonesa, tomato, tomate, all sorts of words that, lettuce, lechuga, that are very similar to Spanish. So I decided as a 16-year-old that I needed to train this guy on how to make the sandwiches because I just thought it was so unfair to relegate him to this really mundane job when he's capable of so much more. Now, at the time, all I had was high school Spanish, and if you're familiar with the American system, back in the 1980s, that wasn't very effective. People that learned a foreign language in the high school usually didn't have much success speaking it. So I took my broken Spanish and used my hands a lot and did what I could to teach this guy. And sure enough, you know, it didn't take him long to catch on because he was a smart guy. And he started to work all parts of the kitchen. Why that was important to me is that that's when I realized the importance of language and learning other languages. I wish that I had spoken Spanish better so that it would be easier for me to help him, even though I was successful in doing so, but also social justice. I mean, I just thought it was not fair the way that he was treated, and so I wanted to help him. So that was the first time, and that would play a big role in my career later on when I got into education. Okay, so after Burger King, I started to work at Disneyland. I'm a big Disneyland fan. I've always lived very close to Disneyland, went there every year as a kid. And when Disneyland Paris opened, I went to Disneyland Paris and I finally got exposed to France and people speaking French in a francophone world, and really enjoyed the experience of trying to use the French that I had, but not being satisfied. I really felt like I wanted to learn to speak French much better. So I went back to the United States and I signed up for a French class. And I had previously dropped out of college, and this is what got me to go back to college so that I could learn to speak French. So I started taking French classes, and the teacher that I had, Mrs. Driscoll, I'll never forget her. The first day in class, she spoke in English to us for about 15 minutes. And then after that, after the first 15 minutes, she said to us, "These are the last words in English I'll ever speak to you." And all of us kind of slumped down in our chairs, kind of scared about being called on. But she did everything she possibly could. She would stand on her head if she had to so that we could understand her. She really believed in immersion, and she really believed in comprehensible input. And boy, did she work hard to make that input comprehensible for us, which also played a big role in inspiring me to get into education and to get into language learning and linguistics. Okay, so I went back to college. I became a French major. I took almost all the classes for being a French major in college, and I only had a couple classes left to finish my major, and they were in French literature. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate literature, even in English. So I really didn't want to take those classes. I was more interested in the grammar and more interested in the phonology and all the different aspects that turned out to be linguistic topics of learning French. And so I went to Cal State Fullerton, California State University of Fullerton in Southern California, and I flipped through the book trying to figure out, okay, what degree can I switch to where the units that I took in French would count? And I stumbled upon linguistics, and what I found, I started to take some linguistics classes, and I just fell in love with it. These were my people. Linguistics was absolutely fascinating. I suddenly became excited to go to school. I enjoyed my French classes, but once I got into the linguistics classes, I just really took off and really, really enjoyed it. I found every word of it fascinating, and I still remember practically everything that my professors said. Of course, I've done lots and lots of reading in linguistics ever since, which has kept it fresh in my mind. But I loved it. Well, after I got my degree in linguistics, then it was time to get a job, to start my career. And so I wanted to do a job where I could use linguistics, and really drew a blank. In a way, I kind of thought that linguistics was like underwater basket weaving. Like, what do you do with a degree in linguistics? Well, I decided that if I could at least get a job where I could speak a foreign language, then it would satisfy me. It would feel that I'm using my degree. So I figured out quickly that in Southern California, I could get a job teaching elementary school and speak Spanish and teach in Spanish and talk to the parents in Spanish. So I got a bilingual certificate in Spanish along with my teaching credential, and I started teaching elementary school in a bilingual setting. And that I loved, because then I was able to use a foreign language almost all day long, which was fantastic. So once I was in the thick of teaching in elementary school, I taught in Anaheim, the city where Disneyland is, and many of the students were emergent bilingual students. So these were students whose first language was a language other than English. The majority of them, their first language was Spanish, and they all came to school to learn English as well as all the other subjects. And so what I really found is that for the first time I realized, there's really a lot of value in linguistics, because I really had an advantage in teaching, because not only did I speak both Spanish and English, and I was a native speaker of English, but I really understood how it works. What I've really found is that just because you speak a language doesn't mean you understand how it works. Those are two separate things. You can be a completely proficient speaker of a language, but not be able to explain it to somebody else. Well, I knew how to explain it to somebody else, and I knew how to explain it in a way that could be simple for little kids, and was very successful at teaching kids language. And so I really drew upon my background in linguistics to help me with my teaching. So I went back to school again and went back to Cal State University of Fullerton, and I got my master's, and I got a master's in educational leadership. And then I eventually worked my way up in the school district so that I was the leader of the school district in the area of language development, both English language development as well as a student's primary language. In our school district, we had some schools that had dual language immersion programs where kids, regardless of their first language, whether it was English or Spanish or something else, could go in kindergarten and be taught to speak both Spanish and English. So I fostered those programs, and with a team of other professionals, I helped them with these programs. And eventually we expanded the program to every single school site in our school district. So I'm very proud of that, and I think that the Anaheim Elementary School District should be very proud of that. As far as I know, they're the only school district in the country where every single school site in the district has a dual language immersion program. Well, before I left my job leading language development in a school district to become the Palm Springs Linguist on YouTube, we also opened up a Korean dual language immersion program. And so Korean was not a language that I spoke. So I really I really spent a lot of time trying to learn Korean and learn about Korean so that I could learn what are the challenges that our students would face. And even got to go on a trip to South Korea. So from there, Then I decided that I wanted to have some variety in my life. I absolutely loved my job at the school district. I had a fantastic job at the school district. But, I wanted to do something different and I wanted to use my linguistics. So that's why I started the channel, my YouTube channel, Palm Springs Linguist. And I started to make videos about linguistics and language. And now I've branched off into other interests of mine. I'm also a big Disneyland fan, so I've made videos about Disneyland. But the core of my channel is definitely linguistics and language. And so right now I'm working on a video about the etymology of the word hamburger and how that's changed over the years, the linguistics of the word hamburger. But I'm always working on something. So thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of my personal background with language and linguistics. Please make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you already have, thank you so much. Make sure to smash that like button, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.